Let's discuss with our panel. We have CNN legal analyst Joey Jackson, a criminal defense attorney, retired New York police detective Michael Alcazar, now an adjunct professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, and CNN senior legal analyst Elie Honig, a former state and federal prosecutor. Thank you all for being with us. Elie, first I want to go to you because you know this courthouse extremely well. Give us an idea of what it actually looks like since cameras aren't allowed inside.
Yeah, Boris, I spent many hours and days inside this courthouse. So what's happening today, what will happen shortly, is an arraignment. So before that, Luigi Mangione is going through some basic processing through the court officers, through the marshals. They'll take his prints. They'll ask him some basic questions. When the court proceeding is ready, he'll be walked into what we call magistrate's court. Now, if you're trying to envision this, it's not the sort of soaring, ornate federal courtroom where most trials happen. This is sort of a unglamorous, dingier courtroom. The ceiling's lower, it's darker, it's smaller, and usually it's just used as a place for sort of initial processing. So Mangione will sit at his table with his lawyer, Karen Friedman Agnifilo, by his side. The prosecutors for the SDNY will be at the other table. The judge will essentially say, Mr. Mangione, you've been charged by complaint. Have you seen the complaint? Have you gone through it with your lawyer? He'll say yes. The judge may ask, how do you plead? If that question gets asked, he will say, I plead not guilty. Do you have a lawyer? Mangione will say, yes, I do. This is the person sitting right next to me. And then the judge will say to the lawyer, do you want to make a motion on bail here? Meaning, do you want to ask for bail? He might ask for bail. Karen Friedman Agnifilo might ask for bail for him, but that's just to put on a show. There's zero chance that he gets bail. And then from that point, the prosecutors, the federal prosecutors, will have 30 days under the rule, and under some readings 20, it sort of depends on the nuances here, but 20 to 30 days to go to a grand jury and get an indictment. At that point, the case will be assigned to a district judge and will be underway in the familiar, normal criminal process.
And Joey, just explain to our viewers these federal charges versus the state charges.
Yeah, so Brianna and Boris, the federal government has what's called concurrent jurisdiction. What that means in English is that the state can charge, and they have. They've indicted him in the 11 counts, which we've talked a lot about, including first-degree murder, second-degree murder, a number of gun charges, etc. The state has done that. However, the federal government also has the jurisdiction to charge, and they have done so. If you look at the distinction in the actual criminal complaint in federal court between the indictment, what I would say is this. In the state court case in which he faces life without parole based upon the terrorism charge, it's a bare bones indictment, just alleging enough to get you to the standards of which are charged as it relates to the murders, as it relates to the gun, etc. However, if you look at the federal complaint, it's what we call it's not even a speaking indictment. It is a singing, screaming indictment. What's the difference? Criminal complaint, not yet been indicted. What I'm saying is that generally it lays out probable cause to believe he's committed one of the 4 offenses in which he's charged. This lays out chapter and verse, a timeline with respect to the plotting and planning, right? Given many days before. It lays out a number of pictures, not only of him, of the gray backpack, of the weapon, of the silencer. It gives you what he was doing. It talks about the manifesto. It talks about the federal, what he was saying in terms of to the feds and listing that out. And so it really is specific in detail with regard to what he has allegedly done, how he has done it, the process he has followed in doing it, and of course the major distinction, because the defense counsel has said in great advocacy that, hey, it's double jeopardy and it's piling on. Federal government has a role here, and it's not double jeopardy to the extent that the nature of the charges are different, right? The course of conduct you have to prove is different, and at the end of the day, the fact is that in federal, right, you have the death penalty. In state court, you don't. A major distinction. Last point, and that is Elie described the magistrate, and it's not as ornate as these federal courthouses, which are beautiful, but compared to state court, that magistrate court is paradise. I mean, it's a lot different from a state perspective, but it just goes to show your level of perspective. Elie Honig being a seasoned federal prosecutor, I spent my time in state court, so when I go into federal courts, it's in awe, right? That's the distinction in terms of the layout and the look, at least.
Michael, I want to ask you about one aspect to what Joey was just describing, and that is the fact that this is a singing or screaming complaint, soon to be indictment. That's in large part because of the amount of evidence that investigators have gathered here, what they found on Mangione when he was apprehended in Altoona. I do wonder how you see federal investigators working with the NYPD and what New York detectives have gathered? Do they basically just pick up from what they have, or do they then, these federal investigators, have to start their own investigation?
I think the feds are going to start their own investigation. Of course, they're going to look at the information that's being shared with them by the NYPD, but they're going to do their due diligence, do their own investigation, look at all the evidence. I mean, there's a wealth of evidence here. What the NYPD recovered at the crime scene, the gun on Mangione, the bullets at the crime scene that now match, the DNA evidence on the bottle, the water bottle, and on the phone, his manifesto, his fingerprints on the manifesto, on the scene. So it's going to be a joint effort, but I believe the feds will conduct their own investigation and then compare what they have with the NYPD.
And Ellie, if you could just talk about how the death penalty relates to the federal charge here and why this would be a candidate for the feds to pursue it.
Yeah, so big issue to watch here in the coming weeks and months. Just to be clear, New York state law does not have a death penalty. So in the state case, the most that Luigi Mangione could be sentenced to is life in prison. But here in the federal court, which we're looking at here on the screen, one of the charges against Luigi Mangione can potentially be punished by the death penalty. Now, there's a process here. DOJ first has to go through its internal process. If you're the prosecutor on this case, you have to write a memo that goes down to the Attorney General's office in D.C. where you recommend we should or should not seek the death penalty. Then the AG and his people in D.C. will review that. And if the decision comes back, yes, we are going to seek the death penalty, then that's the case. But DOJ does not always seek the death penalty in all death-eligible cases. The kind of things you look at are just how heinous was the crime, what's the nature of the crime, how premeditated was it, how many victims were there, are there larger societal needs here, deterrence, rehabilitation, that kind of thing, that would weigh for or against the death penalty. So that process usually takes weeks or months to play out, but important to notice, there's going to be a big difference when the Trump administration takes over DOJ in 3 weeks. I mean, Donald Trump's DOJ was way more aggressive during his first term in imposing the death penalty, certainly than recent Democratic administrations have been. Biden administration has sought death penalty in 2 cases, 2 mass shootings. But I think the chances of a death penalty being sought here are going to go up when Donald Trump's sworn in, when his DOJ takes over in January.
Joey, I want to pick up on something we spoke about yesterday when discussing this Mangione case, and that is the idea of jury nullification being a potential factor. That is, the jury essentially deciding that this person may have committed the act that they're accused of, but that on the greater whole, it would be unjust for them to face a sentence effectively. And you can correct me if I'm misrepresenting jury nullification, but I wonder how that now potentially applies to federal charges.
Yeah, Boris, indeed. I mean, I think most people would be screaming at the screen, and probably are, right? And saying, jury nullification, what are you talking about? He's guilty. Look at this evidence. Look, have you not seen the criminal complaint here in federal court where it lays out chapter and verse? He's on his bicycle. It talks about the manifesto. It talks about to the feds. He's guilty even looking at this. Not so fast. Obviously, you have the presumption of innocence. However, from all public indications, the evidence is really strong. The reason we're here talking about, at least you raise the issue of jury nullification, is we've seen social media. I have never, right, and I'd be curious to know if Ellie has ever seen a case like this where social media really is calling him a hero. He's being called St. Luigi. They're selling T-shirts with angels on them. They're selling trinkets for Christmas. People on social media are saying, hey, it should have been me to do this. It should have happened before. It should happen again. It's insane. And so why is that relevant? Why is public perception relevant? Why am I talking about social media? Because we're talking about a jury pool. Now, of course, the Southern District's jury pool, a lot different from a Manhattan jury pool to the extent that it's more, right? It's a broader area that you have to cover. And I don't know whether that's better or worse with respect to the number of people who are going to be there, the number of people evaluating. Now, I should also say very briefly that you select a jury. And if there's jurors who say, I hate the healthcare system, I hate government, I don't don't like anybody, most of all you, defense attorney, and you, prosecutor, whatever, you excuse them. They're called challenges for cause. But you have a limited number of people who are ultimately, right, going to be on that jury, and those are the people you agree to. But people are people. They have visions, they have emotions, they have perspectives. Will they say, you know what? Wow, this is long overdue. That's something to look for with regard to a hung jury, with regard to a jury that nullifies. You know, I don't know that they will, but if ever there was a case, right, where it would be a jury that would nullify, and last point, look at the last election. The public has spoken with regard to what they feel about the government, with regard to what they feel about the country, and the direction it's heading, the distrust of government, just the feelings overall about politics. They wanted someone in the office who could just be a, you know, just a norm breaker. I'm looking for that as it relates to this case, to be sure.